Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out here today. It was horribly hot today, like it's been for the past 3 months, but it feels kind of decent out there right now. I'm okay with this. We are in the book of Ecclesiastes tonight, and I don't know how to feel about that because, as you saw last week, Ecclesiastes is not an easy book. It is. What's the theme? What's the one word that keeps getting repeated over and over and over again in Ecclesiastes? Vanity, which is another word for futility, meaninglessness, emptiness. And so we're going to see throughout this book, this is all that Solomon is talking about, and he's exploring the biggest question that we have, which is, what is the meaning of life? Why are we here? He's not shying away from these big questions because at this point, he's older. He's lived a lot. He's done a lot of things, some of which he was probably not proud of, but he's done a lot of things. And at this point, he's looking back on everything that he's done, and he's thinking, you know what? What was it all for? Like, what's the point of all of this? And he talks about that a lot. He explores in the first 11 verses. He talks about the sun rises, the sun sets. It's the same cycles over and over and over again. And he uses a phrase that you're going to see over and over and over again throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, which is under the sun. It's this idea of Solomon is looking at he's looking at life through the lens of human wisdom. And he's going to realize, and we're going to see this tonight, part of it, that human wisdom is limited. It is so limited. It is missing one important piece of the puzzle for all of this to have meaning and to make sense. When you're just looking at life through the lens of just this, without God, you can't find a meaning to it. Because without God, there is no meaning to it. And so we're going to talk about that tonight. So a little bit of background about Solomon, as we touched on a little bit last week. Like I said, at this point, Solomon has been king over Israel for a long time. As a matter of fact, look at verse 12. We're going to pick up in verse 12. And it says, I, the teacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. So Solomon's been king. He's calling himself teacher. He's been through a lot. He's done a lot. As a matter of fact, his mother is cool. His mother was Bathsheba, the very same one that King David at the time, had the affair with because she was married to Uriah. And David, it was kind of the big turning point in his kingship. He had been king for a while. God had given him peace on all sides, except, he was in the middle of a war. But overall, things were on the upswing, and he's doing good. He's established as king. And one night, he goes out onto the balcony. He's at his palace when he should be out at war. And he sees Bathsheba. And he has an illicit affair with her that night. And she ends up conceiving. And to try to cover up his sin of adultery, he ends up having Uriah murdered. So not only adultery, but murder. But what's amazing is that God still forgave him of all of this. And so the baby that David had conceived with Bathsheba passed away. So then, because Uriah is dead, Bathsheba is alone now. David takes her into marriage. And she conceives again and gives birth to a son, and that son is Solomon, who wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. And he wrote a few other books of the Bible, or most of sections of other books of the Bible. We'll talk about those. So as Solomon becomes king, David is old, he's dying, and so as soon as David passes away, Solomon becomes king. And God comes to him in a dream at night, and he says, I will do literally anything you ask of me. I will give you anything you could ask of. What do you want? Imagine if God came to you with a blank check like that. I'm sitting here trying to think of what I would actually ask for. I couldn't even imagine that. But Solomon could have said, I want riches. I want glory. I want splendor. I want my kingship to last, for a long time. I want it all. But he didn't. He asked for one thing. Because keep in mind, put yourself in Solomon's place. He's young. His father's just passed away. He is now king over a whole nation. He's scared to death. He's feeling the pressure. He's feeling the weight of this. And so Solomon says, I want wisdom. More than anything in the world, I want you to pour out your wisdom on me so that I can know how to govern these people that you've given me. I mean, what a request. And God loves that request too, because God is so impressed with him. He says, all right, I'll give you that. You'll be the wisest man that this world has known. And in addition to that, because you didn't ask for the riches and the wealth and the honor, I'll give you that too. And so Solomon became not only the wisest king in history, he became also one of, if not the wealthiest. I mean, you read about his account in 1st and 2nd Kings. It's amazing the amount of wealth and notoriety that Solomon had. I mean, people would come from all over the world to hear him speak wisdom. As a matter of fact, 1 Kings 11, I think it's 11, says that, what chapter is it? 1 Kings, where it describes Solomon's reign, and it says that he wrote 3,000 proverbs. 3,000. We only have a small selection of that in the book of Proverbs, which are mostly Solomon's. And he wrote 1,100 songs. I mean, the dude was prolific. He was filled with wisdom. He also wrote the book of Song of Solomon. And who better to know about marriage than him? Because he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. No one knew... That's where you know it's crazy. Yeah, honestly. No one knew more about human marital relationships than Solomon. He had the experience to back it up. And so we're going to see, though, in this section, Solomon, and throughout this book, really, we see the deterioration of Solomon's relationship with God. Because Solomon started out really, really good. He started out doing great things, but he declined. He let human wisdom take over. He let human understanding and human reason take over. He let sin into his life. He let the world distract him and lead him away. And Solomon ended his life and ended his reign in kind of a cold, distant relationship from God. He did. He started out great, but he slowly declined. He slowly chipped away at his character. And what's amazing is you can actually see that traced in his writings. So when you look at the book of Proverbs, a lot of these proverbs written probably when he was really young and in the middle of his kingship, he uses the personal name for God. What is the personal name for God? Yahweh. Exactly. He uses that over and over and over again, meaning he had a personal first name basis relationship with God. By the time we get to Ecclesiastes, Solomon doesn't use the name Yahweh once. When he's talking about God, he uses the generic term Elohim, which in that culture, according to David Jeremiah, in that culture, which is short for Elohim, that name was not a specific name for Yahweh. It was a generic term that could be used for any god. I'm not saying Solomon's not talking about Yahweh. What I'm saying is that he had gotten so cold and so distant in his relationship with God that he's not even calling him by his name anymore. And just as a little tidbit, why don't we use God's name more? I mean, he has a personal name, and it's beautiful, and it's powerful. Just as a little side bit. Anyway, so, into verse 13. So we're going to talk tonight about 3 ways that Solomon attempted to figure life out. And the first thing he's figuring out, or trying to use to figure out, is human wisdom. Notice verse 13. It says, I applied my mind to examine and explore through wisdom all that is done under heaven. God has given people this miserable task to keep them occupied. So notice this. He says, okay, I want to know what life's all about. So I'm going to see if my human reason can get me there. And so he starts thinking about life. He starts pondering it. He starts reading about life and all the great philosophers of the day. He's soaking it all in. He's thinking about it. And then it occurs to him the fact that he's thinking about it. He gets a little self-aware here. He says, God has given people this miserable task to keep them occupied. What this means is, St. Augustine once said that God has created within man a God-shaped hole. And that hole in the human heart can only be filled with God. That the human heart is restless until it finds its rest in God. God has rigged it that way. That's what Solomon's talking about here. He says, God has given people this miserable task, miserable just meaning like it's hard, to keep them occupied. Basically, God has rigged the human heart to such a way that we know that there is a purpose and a meaning, but we can't find it on our own. He has hidden that from us. He has rigged it to where we know that there's more to this, but we can't figure it out on our own. Our own human reason cannot get us there. And at first you think, well, that doesn't seem kind of cruel? Like God to place in us the desire to know that there's meaning and there's more to this, but not really a way to find it ourselves. But in reality, that's His great mercy. His great mercy has allowed us to search knowing that we will find Him. It is His mercy, because if we had found satisfaction in literally anything else, we're doomed. But God has rigged it so that we won't find satisfaction in anything else except Him, which again is His mercy. So, his first search was for wisdom, and it failed him. So human wisdom, in and of itself, is not a bad thing. God has given us faculties. He's given us mental faculties to use to reason and to think and to figure things out. It's because God has given us human wisdom that we've learned how to build buildings, that we've learned how to create technology where we can teach a lesson to people who are across the country or across the world because of this. I mean, human wisdom in and of itself is not a bad thing. Human wisdom is the reason we all have this. It's the reason we have books and paper and food. It's incredible things that God has allowed humans to do. But what Solomon is saying here is that human reason has its limits. Human reason can tell us how to live better. It can tell us what the right kinds of foods are to eat and the things to drink and the right ways to, exercise or take care of yourself. It can tell you the right ways. We use human wisdom when we want to drive or when we want to do all these things. And that's great. But it's missing that eternal perspective. In and of itself, human wisdom has a limit. We cannot grasp the infinite and find the infinite on our own. It's useful, but it only makes living a meaningless life better. It doesn't actually provide the meaning and the wholeness that we long for. So, continuing on, but man, isn't Ecclesiastes just a fun book? Isn't it just great? No, it is. It really is. It doesn't shy away from the heavy questions, but it is good. It reminds me, okay, I think Dad brought this show up last week, but I'm going to bring it up again. Anybody watch Everybody Loves Raymond? Yeah. So there's an episode where they literally spend a whole episode debating this very topic. There's an episode where their daughter asks, "Why are we here?" And the adults go down into the living room and everybody's there and they're arguing about this very thing. And it's amazing to me, even though the writers don't realize they're doing this, it's amazing to me how revealing it is and how honest they are about the fact that they don't have an answer. They're all arguing about these things. And one of the characters even says, like, because, the mother grabs a Bible and she's like, I'm sure it's in here. And one of the characters, again, this is the writer speaking, his worldview. But she says, you're not just going to flip through the Bible and find the meaning of life. But what's amazing is, without this, they have no answer. And that show actually, it's hilarious, that episode, but they reveal the fact that human reason has its limits. That without the divine perspective, there is no meaning to life without Christ. It's void. It's empty. As a matter of fact, in taking the extreme example of it, in that same episode, one of the people is standing back there and he's like freaking out. I mean, just trying to think of all this. And he says, the fruit fly only lives one day. And he's just thinking, he's like, what's his meaning of life? Like, and he asks the question, am I any different than the fruit fly? Notice the despair. And again, they're cracking a joke, but notice the despair of a life without Christ, of a life without God. There's no meaning to it. Are you any different than a fly who's here one day and gone the next? Think about that. And Solomon is using human reason. He's using his under the sun, meaning under heaven, reason. And he's coming to those same conclusions of, what's the point? What is all this? I've done it all. I've seen it all. What is it? But notice at this point, he's asking these questions because his relationship with God has deteriorated to such a degree. So, verse 14. I have seen all the things, that are done under the sun, and have found everything to be futile, a pursuit of the wind. So, like I was just saying, he's done it all. If anyone has the ability to have done everything and seen everything and could afford everything, it's Solomon. And yet he says it's all empty. Notice he says it's a pursuit of the wind. Anybody here actually... I'm going to sound really nerdy and weird when I say this. I love windy days. Like, is that weird to say? Like, anybody else love super windy days? Like, I'm talking like Chicago style, like 30 mile an hour blow you over kind of windy days. I love that. I love that. Actually, huh? Now, see, I love... I'm a winter guy. I love winter. Fall and winter. Summer is for the birds. They can have it. I'm not even kidding you. I hate humidity to such a degree that it freaks my family out, because every summer, as soon as the first day I feel humidity, I'm like looking on realestate.com, like, what are house prices in Wisconsin? Like, it's just anything to get away from the humidity. I hate it so much. But anyway, that's a sidebar. That's why I love winter so much. But one thing I've noticed about North Carolina is the spring here is really nice. Spring here is really pretty because you get those like 15 mile an hour windy days and it's like 65 degrees out. It's perfect. And then May hits. Anyway, I love the wind because it's here during the spring, and I enjoy that, and it's great when it's here, but it always goes away. You don't know where it's coming from. You can't see it. It comes. You feel it, and you enjoy it when it's there, but it's fickle because it's there one day and then it's gone. It's March and April, fantastic. May, whatever. Because the wind is gone. It's like dead still out there. That's what Solomon is saying, chasing after meaning in literally everything but Christ is. It's literally, you enjoy something while it's there that day, and then it's gone. And what is it? There's nothing to it. So Solomon is saying that chasing these things is pointless because they're so fickle, because they cannot permanently satisfy anything. So, verse 15. Notice, in my Bible, I'll show you real quick. In my Bible, it's got it here in kind of like a indented, like a center thing, as if it's a quotation from something. I don't know if anybody else's Bible has that. It's very good because Solomon was quoting an old proverb at the time. So he's saying, what is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. Meaning, human logic, he says, what is crooked cannot be straightened. Human logic is crooked. It's twisted. Sometimes it just doesn't make any sense. He says, what is lacking cannot be counted, meaning there are gaps in human logic. People can walk around holding two completely contradictory viewpoints in their head at the same time and believe both to be true. That doesn't mean both are equally true. Of course, they can't be. Logic dictates that they can't be. But human reasoning can do that. It can justify belief in anything. And it can believe things that are patently not true. Or it can selectively pick facts that it wants to believe and omit the rest. That's the frailty of human wisdom. That it can be twisted, it can be turned, it can be crooked, and then it can be full of gaps, full of holes. So it can only get you so far, but you can't fully trust it. And then verses 16 through 18, we'll finish out chapter 1 and go into a little bit of chapter 2. He says, I said to myself, see, I have amassed wisdom far beyond all those who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has thoroughly grasped wisdom and knowledge. I applied my mind to know wisdom and knowledge, madness and folly. I learned that this too is a pursuit of the wind. There's that phrase again. For with much wisdom, and here's another proverb, for with much wisdom is much sorrow. As knowledge increases, grief increases. So what is he talking about here?
He's talking about what he just went after wisdom. He wasn't having a walk with God. He's doing that. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Remember what we talked about at the beginning? We were talking about kind of the background of Solomon. He said, I've amassed wisdom far beyond all those who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has thoroughly grasped wisdom and knowledge. He's not bragging here. He's telling the truth. God poured out wisdom on him like he's never poured it out on anybody. I mean, to write 3,000 some proverbs, and people, the Queen of Sheba even, coming from all directions of the world just to hear Solomon speak wisdom. He's not bragging. He's telling the truth. He has more wisdom than any of us have ever had. But notice he uses two separate words here, and this is interesting. Solomon, he uses wisdom and knowledge. At first you think, well, that's kind of the same thing, isn't it? It's not. What the two words that Solomon is using here, so wisdom refers to depth. He's talking about, I could take one subject and I could dive as deep as I could possibly go into it. Our culture, our American society, the way we've got it set up, we call it specialization, where you do one thing and that's what you do. That's what you focus on. So like, if you want to be a meteorologist, we were talking about the weather earlier. If you want to be a meteorologist, that's what you do. You focus, you dive deep into that one subject, and you become an expert in that subject. And that's your job. Solomon says, I did that. I could do that with anything. I went as deep as I could possibly go into any subject. That's wisdom. Knowledge, on the other hand, is about breadth. It's a little more shallow, but it's about learning widely. As a matter of fact, for a lot of human history, and even our founding fathers, and a lot of that, just a little bit of history for you, we call them Renaissance men because they did not like to specialize. They did not like just diving deep into one thing and that was it. Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, all these guys, and there's people who like to do it today, they like to generalize. You've heard that phrase, jack of all trades, master of none. That's these guys. These guys, Thomas Jefferson was a meteorologist. He was a paleontologist. He wrote the Declaration of Independence when he was 33. He spoke 7 languages. He was an athlete. He was a musician. He was a mathematician, scientist. They used to do everything. And in our society, we've kind of lost a little bit of that ability to grasp multiple subjects. And Solomon says, I did that too. He says, I had both the depth of wisdom and the breadth of knowledge. So it wasn't just that he was trying to specialize in just philosophy and try to figure out the meaning of life. Solomon has dove deep and he has experienced everything. The full faculties of human reasoning and wisdom with all of its limits, and it's taken him all of that to realize that there are limits, that it's emptiness. He said, I pursued all of this, I've amassed all of this storehouse of wisdom and knowledge, and it means nothing, which had to be so disappointing for him. Notice this proverb at the end of verse 18, for with much wisdom is much sorrow. As knowledge increases, grief increases. Meaning the more you know, the less fun life can be. You know that old phrase, ignorance is bliss? Solomon would agree with that. I think a little bit. Now, I'm not saying be ignorant. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons our country's in the mess it's in is because people are ignorant. If you can't, it irks me, and it would irk Solomon too. But Solomon is saying, and it's very true, the more you know, the less fun life can be. Because he says, with much wisdom is much sorrow. You would think that knowing more, if knowing more made you happy, then those who hold the PhDs, those who are university professors, those who are all those people who are super smart would be happy. But they're not. I can tell you firsthand from college, most of my professors, their lives were a mess. And they were the most critical, judgmental. They were the most, you could just feel the misery just emanating off of them. Because most of them were, either atheists or just, agnostic, not talking about anything. And you could just feel the undercurrent in everything they taught about of just despair. Because they had all of this knowledge, and yet they had no reason. They had no moral purpose. They had no meaning to their lives, and they knew all of this, and yet it meant nothing. And so Solomon is telling us here, the purpose of life, you're not going to get satisfaction out of having a lot of wisdom. You're not going to get satisfaction out of having a lot of knowledge. Now, those things are good in and of themselves, but you can't base your life off the pursuit of knowledge or the pursuit of wisdom. And I can tell you, if you do decide to read more, which again I think you should, read carefully, but do read. Good night. I love it. It's like, okay, we're done. She's told us we're done. But with more knowledge comes the tendency to overthink. It's funny, Dad and my brother will both say the same thing, and my brother-in-law will say the same thing to me all the time. They're like, dude, stop thinking so much. Like, just turn the mind off for a little bit. I'm like, I can't, because it's like just constantly running with stuff. And I'm a very cautious person because I like to think through and like analyze everything, and my mind's constantly analyzing things. And they're like Michael, my brother, will just kind of, like snap out of it, like just stop worrying so much and just live. And that's pretty much what Solomon is telling us here. He's like, the more wisdom you have, the more sorrow you're going to create for yourself. Again, wisdom in and of itself is not bad, but it cannot be the pursuit of your life. It cannot be what you gain your satisfaction from. Because instead of satisfying you, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And there's always more to chase. There's always more to do, and it will never satisfy. And actually, it's the opposite. It can increase sorrow and grief. So that's the first thing he tried to figure out the meaning of life was wisdom. Starting in chapter 2, and we'll wrap up pretty quick, he's going to try two more things in these first 3 verses. He's going to try fun and laughter, and he's going to try wine. All right, so let's see what he does with these. Chapter 2, verse 1, he said, I said to myself, go ahead, I will test you with pleasure, enjoy what is good. And, spoiler alert, what do you think he's going to say here? It says, but it turned out to be futile. I mean, that's kind of the theme of the whole book. You can guess by this point. He's going to try something, and it means nothing. It's emptiness. Verse 2, he said, I said about laughter, it is madness, and about pleasure, what does this accomplish? Meaning, Solomon had all this entertainment, he had all these entertainers, and comedians or singers or dancers or whoever brought in, anything that could bring him pleasure or make him laugh or make him happy, he did it. And then after every single one of them, of course, he was thinking about it, and he would look back and he would say, this is crazy. Like, what's the point? It still does not satisfy. So, in and of itself, again, pleasure is not wrong. In and of itself, laughter is not, obviously, it's not wrong. We laugh all the time. Because God has given us these gifts, and we were designed by God to enjoy His creation. We were. As a matter of fact, 1 Timothy says that God supplies us richly with all things to enjoy, and we're to receive them with gratitude. But these pleasures, in and of themselves, again, this is the theme of the evening, they cannot satisfy. These pleasures, laughter and fun and doing all kinds of things that bring you joy, they're great. But that hedonism, which is the lifestyle of the pursuit of pleasure at all costs, that cannot be your aim in life either. Pleasure can't be your aim in life either because, again, it will not satisfy. It wasn't designed to. All it was designed to do is, again, like Solomon says, point you in the direction of the one who gave it to you. That's why God gives us these things. That's why God gives us good experiences to enjoy. I mean, think of all the blessings we have on a daily basis that we take for granted. A building to worship in. A country that allows us the freedom to worship. This phone, where we can do literally anything on it. Today is the end of Prime Day on Amazon. If you knew that, then you probably ordered some stuff. God gave you the money to do that. I just ate a chicken sandwich from Popeyes before I came here. It was really good. That is a gift from God. I mean, think about it. Even things that we, take for granted, like, let's go get some Wendy's or something like that. Those are gifts of God. How often do we take these things for granted? But the pursuit of food, the pursuit of sex or pleasure or anything cannot be the aim of our lives because they cannot satisfy. I ate that Popeyes. In about 2 hours or so, I'll be hungry again. I mean, a typical meal, a good full meal is only supposed to last you and keep you full for about 4 to 5 hours. After that, you're hungry again. Because they weren't designed to satisfy. And imagine how boring that would be, though, if you had like one meal all day long and you're good. Like, that would be terrible. Anyway, all right, so Solomon tries pleasure, he tries fun, and it doesn't work. So he says, okay, I'll bring alcohol into the mix. That's what our culture says is fun. If you want to liven up a party, Solomon says this party, all this joy and laughter is getting boring, I'll bring some wine in. So he does that. This is the third thing he experiments with. Verse 3. I explored with my mind the pool of wine on my body. Now notice this. Here's the kicker. My mind still guiding me with wisdom. Meaning Solomon wasn't just turning up bottles and becoming a drunkard and seeing how that made him feel. He was just enjoying wine. He was enjoying alcohol and he was thinking the whole time. He kept his mental faculties about him. He kept his human reason about him. And he's examining how he feels after wine. He's examining how he feels after alcohol. Because, a lot of people drink it and, it changes the way, it alters your mood. It's a mood-altering chemical. And so he's examining, okay, how do I feel about this? Can wine satisfy? Is wine the answer of life? Is it the meaning of life? And he says, and how to grasp folly until I could see what is good for people to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. And Solomon's going to say later on, although we're not going to get to that tonight because I'm already going a little over, he's going to say that didn't do anything either. I mean, this is the theme. And then in the next section, he's going to talk about work, which again is something that we all deal with on a daily basis. And he's going to talk about that. And spoiler alert, that's not going to satisfy either. Solomon's going to try all of these things. He has tried all of life, and none of it satisfies. And I feel bad for Solomon. I really do. As someone who also overthinks everything and is prone to depression and these kinds of things like Solomon is obviously dealing with here, I feel bad for him because at this point in his life, he's drifted so far that he doesn't even realize where satisfaction really is. He's forgotten that completely. All right, so I'm going to leave us with this analogy here. Scientists refer to the universe and certain workings within the universe as closed systems. Especially if you're a scientist who does not believe in God, you're going to refer to the universe as a closed system. Think of it like a donut. It's like it's a system wherein everything works within itself. Nothing outside of it comes in and influences it, and it's its own thing. It's just doing its own thing. Historians use the same thing to refer to. Has everybody heard the phrase "history repeats itself"? Those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. That history works in cycles. Again, it's like a donut. It just works in cycles with nothing to change it. It's just the same thing over and over and over again. That's human reason without divine intervention. That's human life without divine intervention. It's a closed system. It continues on the same way in the same circular pattern every single day. Without God, the sun rises, you wake up, you go to work, you do your hobbies in the evening, spend time with your family, you go to sleep, and you do it all and all over and over and over and over again ad nauseum until you die. That's the closed system of life under the sun. However, that sounds awful, by the way. Like it's miserable. But the good news is that the Christian life means that life is not a closed system anymore. So think of the donut. Christ came in and he split that wide open. God came from outside of this system, outside of the circular patterns of history. He invaded history, and with his miracles and his life and his death and his resurrection has changed everything. Everything is different now. Our lives have meaning. Our lives have purpose now. We're not the donut. We're not the closed system anymore. That's the frailty of human reason. But our lives now have meaning, and they have value, and they have purpose because of Christ. And that's why Christ is the only thing that we should be pursuing for our full satisfaction, because he is the only one that can. The only one that can. Everything else that he gives us is meant to point us in his direction. It's meant to bring us closer to him. Romans tells us that God basically woos us with his kindness, that he draws us in with these cords of love. He gives us wisdom. He gives us fun and laughter and pleasure, and he gives us all these wonderful things because they were meant to lead us to him, not be the ends in and of themselves. All right, let's pray. And before you leave, we have our own closed systems for you back there. Mom, will you raise your hand? Oh, well, there she is. Okay, yeah, so before you leave, if you want one, we have donuts. So if you can sit through a lesson of Ecclesiastes, you deserve a donut because it's heavy stuff. All right, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you so much for this beautiful day that you've given us and the freedom and the privilege and the ability to come to your house and worship you openly. Thank you for even giving us a place to worship. Thank you for Holly and how flexible and accommodating and how awesome she is for our church. Thank you for your word that has invaded our closed loop, our closed system, that has invaded our human wisdom and given us your divine perspective on life. And thank you for not leaving us alone here on earth, that you came for the express purpose of rescuing us and restoring us to fellowship with you. Father, I pray that you would give us all wisdom, but the right kind of wisdom. I pray that you would give us discernment also, Father, along with that wisdom, to know the difference between what is your wisdom and what is the wisdom of this world and its broken system. Thank you, Father, so much for all the pleasures that you give us to enjoy and the things that you do for us on a daily basis that we take for granted. May we not take those for granted, and I pray that they would ultimately lead us back to you, Father, so that we can enjoy our life with you while we're here under the sun. In Jesus' precious, beautiful name, amen.